Sylvie's trembling hands clutched the teddy bear still warm from Felicity's desperate grip, her knuckles white against the soft brown fur as she stood frozen in the hospital corridor where her sister's life support had just been disconnected. The sterile white walls seemed to close in around her like a tomb, pressing against her chest until each breath felt like swallowing glass. Before her stood 3 children whose world had just shattered into a million irreparable pieces, and they were looking at her like she held the glue to put it all back together. 8-year-old Cora stood protectively in front of her younger siblings, her small shoulders carrying the crushing weight of sudden responsibility that no child should ever bear. Trevor, 6 and bewildered, pressed close to his sister's side with tears streaming down his dirt-streaked cheeks. 4-year-old Felicity clutched at empty air where her beloved bear had been, her blue eyes wide with the kind of incomprehension that breaks adults open and leaves them bleeding. When Cora finally spoke, her voice cracked with the kind of raw fear that could destroy grown men. "Aunt Sylvie, are we going to be okay?" The teddy bear still carried the devastating collision of scents, her sister Cheryl's vanilla perfume mixed with the sharp bite of hospital antiseptic, creating an olfactory memory that would haunt Sylvie's dreams for months to come. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like static electricity in her brain as the crushing realization hit her. 3 heartbeats now depended entirely on decisions she had never learned to make, choices she felt utterly unqualified to handle. The sound of her sister's ventilator being turned off still echoed in her ears like a death knell as the Children's Services caseworker pressed legal documents into her other trembling hand. Paperwork that would either save or destroy what remained of her fractured family. What do you do when the universe drops 3 broken hearts into your trembling hands and whispers, "Here's your chance to either heal or destroy what matters most"? If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our Dear Love Diaries family. Your special place in this community of heartfelt stories is waiting for you. These passionate journeys of souls connecting against all odds have brought together thousands of beautiful hearts just like yours. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately when a new story unfolds in our diary of love. Hello once again, beautiful Love Diaries family. Welcome to our sacred sanctuary where wounded hearts find their healing and lost souls discover their home. Whether you're holding your morning coffee like a lifeline or seeking solace in the quiet hours when the world sleeps, you've arrived at the exact moment your heart needed this story. This isn't just a channel, this is hallowed ground where we witness the most profound transformations of the human spirit. Every story we share here carries the power to crack open hearts that have forgotten how to feel, to remind souls who've lost their way that love isn't just possible, it's inevitable when we're brave enough to receive it. I'm curious, where in this beautiful, broken, magnificent world are you watching from today? Whether you're in a penthouse overlooking city lights or a small room where you're rebuilding your life piece by piece, drop your location in the comments below. Your presence here creates ripples of connection that heal hearts across continents. Today's story will devastate you in the most beautiful way. It's about Sylvie, a woman whose carefully constructed life explodes in a single moment, and Tobias, a man whose heart has been so shattered he's convinced it can never be trusted with love again. When tragedy forces their wounded souls together, they'll discover that sometimes the family you never wanted becomes the salvation you never knew you were desperately seeking. This is a tale of hearts learning to beat again, of love that heals the impossible, and of the breathtaking courage it takes to choose forever when your heart has already been destroyed once. Chapter 1. Sylvie's pristine downtown loft had been her sanctuary for 8 years, a monument to minimalist perfection where every surface gleamed and every item had its designated place. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city she had conquered through sheer determination and 60-hour work weeks. Her furniture, carefully selected pieces of modern art masquerading as function, had never encountered sticky fingers or juice boxes or the beautiful chaos that children brought to every space they inhabited. Within 3 days of the children's arrival, her sanctuary transformed into something unrecognizable. Car seats battled for space against her designer dining chairs. Crayons and coloring books colonized her glass coffee table. The refrigerator, once stocked with nothing but organic vegetables and expensive wine, now overflowed with juice boxes, string cheese, and the kind of processed foods she had spent her adult life avoiding. She was competent with million-dollar advertising campaigns, could negotiate contracts that would make seasoned lawyers weep with envy, and had built a reputation for turning impossible client demands into award-winning successes. But she was utterly helpless when Trevor cried inconsolably for his mother at 3 in the morning, when Cora refused to eat anything except cereal for 3 meals straight, or when Felicity had nightmares so intense they left all 4 of them shaking and exhausted. Dar. Monique Ford, the trauma specialist the hospital had recommended, arrived at Sylvie's loft on a Tuesday afternoon when desperation had driven Sylvie to make the call she had been avoiding for weeks. "They need stability," Dr. Ford explained, her kind eyes taking in the beautiful disaster of Sylvie's transformed living space. "But they also need someone who understands trauma, who can help them process what they've experienced. I have someone in mind, Tobias Montez. He's a former elementary teacher who specializes in trauma-informed childcare. He's been through his own losses." When Tobias arrived for the interview that Friday evening, Sylvie noticed immediately how differently the children responded to him. Where they had maintained careful distance from the parade of potential nannies she had interviewed, they gravitated toward this tall, broad-shouldered man with patient blue eyes and hands that seemed to know instinctively how to fold paper airplanes and tie shoelaces with the kind of care that spoke to more than just professional experience. He knelt to Felicity's eye level when she shyly approached with her stuffed bear, and within minutes she was showing him the bear's owie, a small tear in the fabric that she had been worrying at obsessively since the accident. Tobias examined the wound with the seriousness of a surgeon, then produced a travel sewing kit from his jacket pocket. "Mr. Bear needs some healing," he told her solemnly, and Felicity nodded with the gravity of a child who understood that some wounds required special attention. Sylvie watched from the kitchen doorway as this stranger worked tiny, careful stitches into the bear's arm while Felicity supervised with intense concentration. Something shifted in her chest, part gratitude, part something she didn't dare name. When Trevor wandered over with a picture he had drawn of their family before the accident, Tobias studied it with the same reverence he had shown the bear's injury. "Tell me about this," he said, pointing to each figure, and Trevor launched into an animated explanation of who was who and why Daddy was wearing his favorite blue shirt and why Mommy's hair was yellow like sunshine. Cora maintained her protective distance, but Sylvie caught her watching Tobias with the calculating gaze of a child who had learned too young that adults could disappoint you in devastating ways. When he didn't push, didn't try to win her over with forced cheerfulness or empty promises, some of the tension in the little girl's shoulders began to ease. They established boundaries over coffee after the children had gone to bed. He would be live-in help, she would maintain ultimate authority, and they were professionals working toward the children's well-being. Nothing more, nothing complicated. "I need someone who understands that this is temporary," Sylvie explained, her voice carrying the crisp efficiency that had made her legendary in boardrooms. "Until I figure out how to balance everything." Tobias nodded, but something in his expression suggested he heard the uncertainty she was trying to hide. "Trauma isn't temporary," he said quietly. "Healing isn't something you schedule around quarterly reports. These kids need consistency, not someone who's planning their exit strategy." The words stung because they were true. When he accepted the position and extended his hand to shake on their agreement, the contact lingered a heartbeat too long. His palm was warm and calloused, speaking of work that involved more than keyboards and conference calls. Both pretended not to notice the way that simple touch sent awareness shooting up her arm like electricity. "I'd love to know, have you ever found yourself in a situation where accepting help felt like the scariest thing you could do? Share your thoughts in the comments below." Chapter 2. 2 weeks into their carefully structured arrangement, the fragile peace they had built shattered at 2:17 a.m. when Felicity's screams tore through the loft like a siren of pure anguish. This wasn't the crying of a child having a bad dream, this was the sound of a 4-year-old soul reliving the moment she watched her parents die in twisted metal and broken glass. Both Sylvie and Tobias reached her room at the same moment, nearly colliding in the doorway as they rushed toward the sound of absolute devastation. Felicity thrashed in her small bed, her body convulsing with grief too enormous for her tiny frame to contain, her screams echoing off the walls with a primal terror that made Sylvie's bones ache. Working together with an instinct that surprised them both, they created a human fortress around her pain. Sylvie's body became Felicity's shield, absorbing the child's flailing fists and desperate kicks, while Tobias's deep voice became her anchor, humming lullabies in a language that somehow reached through the child's terror to the frightened little girl underneath. They didn't just comfort her, they absorbed her pain into their own bodies, sharing the weight of trauma too heavy for any child to carry alone. Sylvie felt each of Felicity's shuddering breaths as if they were her own, while Tobias's strong hands rubbed small circles on the child's back with the patience of someone who understood that healing couldn't be rushed. When Felicity finally exhausted herself into sleep between them on her narrow bed, they found themselves trapped in an intimacy that felt both accidental and destined. The bed was meant for a 4-year-old, forcing them close enough that Sylvie could feel the heat radiating from Tobias's chest, could smell the subtle cologne that had become synonymous with safety in their home. Tobias noticed how her sharp professional edges completely dissolved in the dim glow of the nightlight, how her breath caught when their hands accidentally brushed while checking Felicity's temperature. In the darkness, she wasn't the intimidating executive who commanded boardrooms, she was simply a woman who had been thrust into an impossible situation and was doing her best not to drown. In whispered voices that felt like prayers in the sacred darkness, they began to excavate their deepest wounds. Tobias told her about Maya. Not just that his daughter had died, but how he had held her broken body in the hospital after the custody battle that had put her on that street corner at the exact moment the drunk driver ran the red light. I was fighting for more time with her, his voice broke in the darkness. I thought I could save her from her mother's neglect, thought if I just tried harder, fought longer. I dream about her calling for me, reaching for me, and I can never get to her in time. Sylvie's confession tore her apart from the inside out. She whispered about how she had ignored Cheryl's increasingly desperate calls because she was tired of the drama, how she had changed her phone number when Cheryl asked for money for the children's clothes, how their last conversation had ended with Sylvie hanging up on her sister's tears. I don't know how to be soft, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Softness meant being hurt, and I chose success over connection because at least achievements couldn't abandon you. But now I have 3 children who need softness, and I don't know how to give them what I never learned to be. In that darkened room, something miraculous and terrible happened. They saw each other's wounds and recognized not just kindred spirits, but 2 halves of the same broken heart. When Tobias's thumb traced away a tear she didn't know had fallen, when her fingers instinctively curled around his wrist like he was her anchor in a storm, the connection between them shifted from partnership to something that felt dangerously like destiny. Neither pulled away when their foreheads touched across Felicity's sleeping form. Neither spoke when their breath mingled in the small space between their lips. They didn't kiss, not yet, but something deeper happened in that moment. Their souls touched, recognizing in each other the possibility of healing they had both thought was impossible. Chapter 3. Following their soul-bearing night, an electric awareness hummed between them that made every casual interaction feel charged with dangerous possibility. Sylvie caught herself memorizing how Tobias moved through her space, the way his hands gentled everything they touched, how he had transformed her sterile loft into a home that pulsed with life and laughter. She left for work earlier than usual, her body still humming with the memory of his touch, unsettled by how desperately she wanted to stay in that sacred space they had created. The elevator ride to her office felt like an escape and a loss all at once. A cancelled client meeting became the universe's gift when she returned home at 2 p.m., her key turning in the lock to reveal her controlled world beautifully destroyed. Trevor's enthusiastic art project had exploded across every available surface. Paint handprints on windows like tiny declarations of joy, colors bleeding across paper onto her dining table, the nearby wall transformed into an accidental masterpiece of childhood wonder. She followed the trail of creative chaos toward the kitchen, briefcase in hand, prepared to survey the damage with her usual efficiency. Nothing could have prepared her for what she found there. Tobias stood at her kitchen sink, and the sight hit her like lightning striking directly into her soul. His shirt hung forgotten over a chair, abandoned in favor of practicality as he washed tempera paint from his skin. Water cascaded down shoulders that seemed carved by angels with too much time on their hands, afternoon sunlight streaming through her floor-to-ceiling windows and turning each water droplet into liquid diamonds against the golden canvas of his chest. The light illuminated the gentle strength in his movements as he cleaned paint from his collarbone with the same tender care he showed her children. Blue paint streaked across his ribs like abstract art, and yellow handprints decorated his shoulder blades, evidence of Trevor's enthusiastic creativity and complete trust. Her briefcase didn't just slip from her nerveless fingers, it crashed to the marble floor like her composure, the sharp sound echoing through the kitchen like a gunshot of pure desire. Tobias turned at the sound, water still glistening on his chest like a baptism of want, and time became honey-slow as their eyes locked across the space that suddenly felt far too small to contain the electricity crackling between them. She stood there in her power suit, navy blue armor that had intimidated CEOs and commanded respect in every boardroom she entered, but feeling utterly naked under his gaze. He stood half-dressed and magnificent, paint-streaked and perfect in the golden light flooding her kitchen, reaching for his shirt but making no move to put it on, as if he was as frozen by this moment as she was. "Trevor's channeling Picasso," Tobias said, his voice rougher than usual, rougher than it had any right to be when discussing a 6-year-old's art project. "I can see that," Sylvie managed, her usually razor-sharp composure completely obliterated as she drank in every detail, the breadth of his shoulders, the gentle strength in his hands, the way that streak of blue paint along his ribs made her want to trace it with her tongue. She was simultaneously terrified and fascinated, her body betraying every professional boundary she had ever built. This man represented chaos in her controlled universe, yet she couldn't deny the way heat pooled low in her belly, the way her skin felt too tight, the way she wanted to cross that kitchen and discover if he tasted as good as he looked. After the previous night's emotional intimacy, seeing him like this felt impossibly intimate, like a secret that had been shared between their souls. The memory of his thumb on her cheek, of their foreheads touching in the darkness, of the way he had held her while she fell apart, it all crashed over her in a wave of want so intense it left her breathless. Trevor bounded into the kitchen at that moment, oblivious to the sexual tension thick enough to cut with a knife, proudly displaying his masterpiece with paint-covered hands and pure joy radiating from his 6-year-old face. "Look, Aunt Sylvie. I made you a picture of our new family," he announced, holding up a paper covered in handprints and stick figures that somehow managed to capture more love than any professional portrait ever could. Tobias finally pulled on his shirt, but his movements were slow, deliberate, and when the fabric covered that beautiful chest, Sylvie felt the loss like a physical ache. Their eyes met over Trevor's head, and the promise hanging in the air between them was impossible to ignore. The moment haunted them for days, every casual touch became charged with possibility, every shared glance carried the memory of that afternoon light and the unspoken acknowledgement of what neither quite dared to name. Chapter 4. Over the following weeks, they developed a rhythm that felt dangerously natural, like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their perfect fit. Tobias had breakfast ready when she emerged for work, not just coffee and toast, but elaborate pancake faces that made the children giggle and smoothies disguised as superhero fuel that actually contained vegetables. She responded by bringing home treats the children loved and, increasingly, things she noticed Tobias enjoyed, fancy coffee beans, books she thought he might like, a particular brand of soap he had mentioned preferring. They tag-teamed bedtime stories, school pickups, and the hundreds of small decisions that came with raising children. When Cora needed help with homework, when Trevor required negotiation to take a bath, when Felicity wanted someone to listen to her elaborate stories about her stuffed animals' adventures, they handled it all together with an ease that surprised them both. The moments that completely undid Sylvie weren't grand gestures but tiny observations that revealed the depth of Tobias's care. She noticed how he remembered that Cora liked her sandwiches cut diagonally because triangles reminded her of the way her mother used to make them. He somehow convinced Trevor to take baths without the epic battles that had characterized their first week, turning the ordeal into a game involving pirates and treasure hunts. But it was watching him read to Felicity that truly destroyed her defenses. He created different voices for every character, acted out dramatic scenes with such commitment that the little girl dissolved into giggles, and somehow always knew exactly when she needed an extra hug or when a story required a happier ending than the book provided. Sylvie found herself hurrying home not just to see the children, but to witness the magic he created in their everyday life. She would linger in doorways, watching him help with homework or mediate sibling disputes, marveling at how he made the impossible look effortless. Roman Crawford, her demanding boss and senior partner at the advertising firm, began to notice her new boundaries with the sharp attention of a shark scenting blood in the water. When she left at 5:30 for Trevor's school play, he made pointed comments about shifting priorities and commitment levels. When she declined a weekend client meeting because it was Cora's birthday, his displeasure was palpable. "This industry doesn't pause for personal complications, Sylvie," he warned during their weekly review. "Your work has always been exceptional, but lately." But when Tobias texted her a photo of Trevor's proud face after his solo in the school concert, gap-toothed grin shining brighter than stage lights, she realized her priorities had already shifted in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. The work that had once defined her now felt like an interruption to the life that was becoming real. They began to rely on each other for more than childcare logistics, their partnership deepening into something that resembled a marriage in everything but name. When Cora had a meltdown about missing her parents, triggered by a Mother's Day project at school, they handled it together, creating a memory book that honored Cheryl and David while helping Cora process her grief. When Sylvie faced a crisis at work, she found herself calling Tobias first, wanting his calm perspective more than any colleague's advice. His voice could steady her racing heart, his quiet wisdom could untangle problems that seemed impossible, and his belief in her capabilities could restore her confidence when clients or bosses tried to shake it. When Tobias struggled with his own healing journey, guilt-ridden nights when he dreamed of Maya, therapy sessions that left him raw and questioning, Sylvie offered the kind of practical support that somehow felt more intimate than comfort. She researched therapists who specialized in survivor's guilt, she created space for his processing without trying to fix or minimize his pain, and she held him when words weren't enough. The awareness between them grew impossible to ignore, like a current running just beneath the surface of every interaction. When their hands brushed passing coffee mugs, when she caught him watching her read to Felicity with an expression that made her heart race, when he steadied her while she reached for something in a high cabinet and his hands lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary, each touch became charged with possibility neither quite dared to name. She noticed how his eyes followed her movements when she got ready for work in the mornings, how his gaze lingered on her mouth when she laughed at the children's antics, how he found excuses to be near her in the kitchen while she prepared their lunches. He was perfectly appropriate, perfectly professional, but the heat in his eyes told a different story. He noticed how she leaned into his touch when he helped her with her coat, how her breath caught when he stood close enough that she could smell his cologne, how she watched him with the children with an expression that suggested she was seeing him not just as their caregiver, but as something much more dangerous to her carefully controlled heart. Their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Adeline Holland, became an inadvertent witness to their growing connection. When she encountered them at the playground, Tobias pushing Felicity on the swings while Sylvie cheered Trevor's climb across the monkey bars and Cora showed off her basketball skills. The older woman's knowing smile suggested she saw what they were still afraid to acknowledge. "You make a beautiful family," Mrs. Adeline commented one Saturday afternoon, her eyes twinkling with the wisdom of someone who had witnessed many love stories unfold. "That man looks at you like you hung the moon, dear. And those children, they've found their home." The words followed Sylvie for days, echoing in quiet moments when she watched Tobias help with homework or saw him automatically reach for her hand when they walked together to school pickup. Maybe they did look like a family. Maybe that wasn't as terrifying as she had thought. Chapter 5. The legal documents arrived on a Tuesday morning that had started like any other, delivered by a courier who had no idea he was carrying a bomb designed to destroy the fragile happiness they had built. Adele Morrison, Cheryl's former friend and a woman Sylvie barely remembered, was challenging her guardianship of the children. Sylvie sat at her kitchen table, reading the formal language that questioned her fitness as a guardian, her hands trembling as she absorbed allegations about her demanding work schedule, her lack of parenting experience, and most damaging of all, questions about the appropriateness of a male live-in caregiver with unclear motivations. The custody challenge was thorough and devastating. Adele had compiled evidence of Sylvie's 60-hour work weeks, her frequent business trips, and her apparent reliance on hired help to raise children who deserved a stable, two-parent home with experienced caregivers. The documents painted her as a career-obsessed woman playing house with children she wasn't equipped to handle. As if the universe had decided to test every foundation she had built, Roman Crawford chose that same week to deliver an ultimatum that felt like a death sentence. The senior vice president position she had worked toward for 8 years was finally within reach, but it required frequent travel, longer hours, and a level of commitment that would make her current balancing act impossible. "This is what you've wanted since you walked through our doors," Roman said, sliding the offer across his mahogany desk. "Senior VP, your own team, the Carlisle account, everything you've earned. But I need to know you're all in, Sylvie. No more leaving at 5:30, no more declined weekend meetings. This position demands everything." The promotion represented every dream she had built her adult life around, but accepting it meant destroying the family stability they had created. She stared at the contract, seeing her old self reflected in the ambitious terms, a woman who had believed professional success could fill every empty space in her heart. Faced with legal scrutiny that painted him as a potential threat to the children's well-being, and his own demons resurging with a vengeance, Tobias began to withdraw from the intimacy they had built. His guilt over Maya's death clawed its way back to the surface. What if his presence brought danger to this family too? What if loving them meant losing them the way he had lost everything else that mattered? "Maybe Adele's right," he said one evening after the children had gone to bed, his voice carrying a defeated quality that broke Sylvie's heart. "Maybe they'd be better off with a traditional family, someone who can give them stability without the complications I bring." He started talking about finding them a more appropriate arrangement, about stepping back before he caused more damage, about protecting them from the scrutiny his presence invited. Each word felt like a dagger to Sylvie's chest, but she couldn't argue with the logic when her own fears were screaming the same warnings. The possibility of losing both the children and Tobias forced Sylvie to confront how completely her life had transformed. She had built walls for so long that the thought of vulnerability still terrified her, but losing this unexpected family terrified her more. She found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling and trying to imagine a future without Trevor's giggling, Cora's thoughtful observations, Felicity's sleepy cuddles, and Tobias's steady presence anchoring them all. The woman who had once prided herself on independence now couldn't imagine navigating a single day without the beautiful chaos they had created together. But every lawyer she consulted delivered the same message: her case would be stronger with traditional stability, fewer complications, and a more conventional approach to childcare. Have you ever faced a moment where protecting your heart meant potentially losing everything that mattered? I'd love to hear about times when you've had to choose between safety and love in the comments below. They began to retreat from each other, both terrified of the intensity of their connection and the vulnerability it demanded. Professional boundaries resurged like scar tissue, protective but painful. Tobias moved through the house like a ghost of himself, efficient but distant. Sylvie worked later hours, using the office as a refuge from feelings too dangerous to examine. The children felt the shift immediately. Trevor asked why Tobias wasn't smiling anymore. Cora retreated into herself, her old protective instincts kicking in as she sensed the adults around her pulling away. Felicity began having nightmares again, sensing the fragility of their newly constructed world. In trying to protect what they had built, they were destroying it from the inside out. Chapter 6. The elementary school auditorium buzzed with the excited energy of proud families gathered to watch their children shine. Parents filled every seat, grandparents held cameras ready to capture precious moments, and siblings fidgeted in anticipation of their turn to applaud. Sylvie sat alone in the third row, an empty chair beside her, screaming about every moment Cheryl would never witness, every milestone that would go uncelebrated by the mother who should have been there. When Cora took center stage in her tiny costume, a pioneer girl dress that swallowed her small frame, she searched the audience with the desperate hope of every child performing their first solo. Her eyes found Sylvie's face in the crowd and lit up with such pure, radiant joy that something fundamental cracked open inside Sylvie's chest. Cora's voice, clear and sweet, filled the auditorium as she sang about home and family and belonging. Every word felt like a direct arrow to Sylvie's heart, especially when the little girl's eyes never left her face, as if Sylvie was the only person in the world whose approval mattered. Sylvie made it through the performance with her composure intact, even managed to cheer and clap with the other parents. But the moment she reached the parking lot, the careful control she had maintained for months finally exploded into pieces. She fled to her car not just crying but completely destroyed, finally allowing herself to grieve not just for her sister but for the family she thought she'd never want and was now terrified she'd lose. Her sobs came from a place so deep she didn't know it existed, a well of terror and love and desperate need that her professional facade had kept carefully buried. Her perfect composure cracked open like an egg, revealing the frightened woman inside who was convinced she was failing everyone who depended on her. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, her careful hair came undone, and her designer jacket wrinkled as she collapsed against her car door, finally letting herself feel everything she had been running from. He found her there, having left his own car to search for her when she didn't return from the parking lot. Without hesitation, without asking permission, he pulled her into his arms like she was something precious that needed protection. His large hands cradled her head as she sobbed into his chest, and she didn't resist because resisting him had become impossible. "I don't know how to be soft," she choked out against his shirt, her voice breaking on every word. "I don't know how to be what they need. I see other mothers and they make it look so natural, so easy, and I feel like I'm just pretending, like at any moment they'll figure out I'm not enough and they'll be taken away and it'll be my fault, just like Cheryl was my fault because I wasn't there when she needed me most." His response destroyed her. "You're already everything they need. You're everything I need." His voice was rough with emotion, raw with truth he could no longer keep buried. "You think you're pretending, but I watch you read parenting books at midnight when you think no one sees. I watch you practice braiding hair on YouTube tutorials. I watch you panic over every fever and celebrate every small victory like it's the most important thing in the world." He lifted her chin with gentle fingers, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You're not pretending, you're becoming the mother they deserve, and you're already the woman I'm falling in love with." The words hung between them, dangerous and true and impossible to take back. When she looked up at him through her tears, seeing not judgment but pure adoration in his eyes, something inside her surrendered completely. Their first kiss wasn't gentle, it was desperate, months of suppressed longing and emotional intimacy finally finding expression. She kissed him like he was salvation and damnation all at once, like he held the power to heal or destroy her completely. He kissed her like she was the answer to prayers he had been afraid to pray, like loving her was both the bravest and most terrifying thing he had ever done. As if the universe approved of their surrender, rain began to fall gently around them, not a dramatic storm but a cleansing baptism. Standing there soaked and clinging to each other, they finally spoke the truth that had been building between them for months. "I'm in love with you," she whispered against his lips, the words torn from her soul. "And it terrifies me because I don't know how to love without losing." "Then let me teach you," he murmured back, his forehead pressed against hers. "Let me show you that love doesn't always end in loss. Sometimes it ends in forever." Chapter 7. The custody hearing took place in a sterile courtroom that felt more like a tribunal than a place where a family's future would be decided. Adele Morrison sat across the aisle with her lawyer, presenting herself as the stable, traditional choice, married, experienced with children, and untainted by the complications that seemed to follow Sylvie's unconventional arrangement. Adele's attorney painted a devastating picture, Sylvie as an absent workaholic who had hired an unqualified man to raise children she barely knew, creating an environment of instability and questionable boundaries. The custody challenge questioned not just Sylvie's parenting abilities, but Tobias's qualifications, motivations, and the appropriateness of their living arrangement. The children, interviewed separately by the court's child advocate, broke Sylvie's heart with their honest responses. When asked where they wanted to live, all three said they wanted to stay with Aunt Sylvie and Tobias. When asked why, their answers revealed both their love and their deep-seated fear of being separated again. In a moment that changed everything, Tobias took the stand not as an employee, but as someone who loved these children with every fiber of his being. His testimony became a love letter to the family they had built together. "I've watched Sylvie transform from a successful executive into a devoted guardian," he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what hung in the balance. "She reads parenting books at midnight and practices braiding hair from YouTube tutorials. She's turned her pristine loft into a home where children can be children. She's learned that love isn't about perfection, it's about showing up, learning, and choosing them every single day." His words painted a picture of their daily life. Bedtime stories that went on too long because Felicity asked for just one more page, homework sessions at the kitchen table where patience won over frustration, Sunday morning pancake breakfasts that turned into flour fights that left them all laughing and covered in batter. "These children don't need perfect parents," Tobias continued, his eyes finding Sylvie's across the courtroom. "They need people who will fight for them, who will hold them when they cry for parents who can't come back, who will celebrate their victories and help them heal their wounds. They need exactly what they have, a family that chose each other through the worst circumstances and decided to build something beautiful from the broken pieces." When Sylvie took the stand, her testimony became a declaration of transformation that left the courtroom silent. She spoke about the woman she had been, driven, successful, but emotionally isolated, and the woman she had become through loving these children. "I didn't know how to be a mother," she admitted, her voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. "I still don't know if I'm doing it right. But these children have taught me that love isn't about having all the answers, it's about being willing to learn them together. It's about choosing to show up even when you're terrified, especially when you're terrified." She looked directly at the judge as she made her formal request, "I want to adopt all three children, Your Honor. Not because I have everything figured out, but because they are already my family in every way that matters. And I ask the court to recognize Tobias not as hired help, but as the partner who has helped me become the parent they deserve." The courtroom fell silent as the implications of her words settled. She wasn't just fighting for guardianship, she was claiming her right to be these children's mother and asking for legal recognition of the family they had built together. While waiting for the judge's decision, they sat together in the courthouse hallway, Tobias's hand covering hers, Cora pressed against Sylvie's side, Trevor curled in Tobias's lap, and Felicity clutching her repaired bear while sitting between them. They looked exactly like what they were, a family that had been forged in crisis and tempered by love. When the judge called them back into the courtroom, her decision was swift and decisive. The court awarded Sylvie full custody of all three children, recognizing the stability and love they had found in their unconventional arrangement. More importantly, she expedited the adoption process, acknowledging that these children had already found their permanent home. Chapter 8. After winning guardianship and setting the adoption process in motion, they put the children to bed together with a new reverence. This bedtime routine now felt like a celebration of their legally confirmed family status, each story read and lullaby sung carrying the weight of permanence they had fought so hard to secure. But the emotional intensity of nearly losing everything had left them both raw and achingly aware of how close they had come to never having this chance at forever. The fear of loss had been replaced by the overwhelming reality of what they had almost thrown away in their desperate attempts to protect themselves. Unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Sylvie stepped onto her bedroom balcony wearing nothing but a silk robe that whispered against her skin in the night breeze. The city lights below seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as her heartbeat, fast, uncertain, alive with possibility she was finally brave enough to embrace. Tobias, equally restless after the day that had changed everything, found her there silhouetted against the urban constellation. The sight of her, vulnerable, beautiful, finally his to love without reservation, stole what little breath he had left. "Can't sleep either?" His voice was rougher than usual, carrying the weight of everything they had been through, everything they had almost lost, everything they were too afraid to claim until tonight. Too much adrenaline, she admitted, turning toward him. In the moonlight, he could see that her composure was hanging by the thinnest thread. Too much fear. Too much hope. I feel like my heart might explode from trying to hold it all. When she shivered, not from cold but from the intensity of having him close in the intimate darkness, he moved toward her like gravity itself was pulling him. They weren't talking about the court victory or the children's future anymore. They were acknowledging the electric current that had been building between them for months, the awareness that had made every innocent touch feel like fire, every shared glance feel like a promise. Her hand found his chest, feeling his heartbeat thundering beneath her palm, and he covered her fingers with his own, pressing her touch deeper, holding her there like she was his anchor in a storm. "I'm terrified," she whispered, not of the night or the balcony height, but of how much she needed him, how completely he had become part of her vision of family and future and forever. "So am I," he admitted, his thumb tracing her cheek with reverence. "But I'm more terrified of not taking this chance. Of not loving you the way you deserve to be loved." Their first kiss under the stars was everything, tender and desperate, months of suppressed attraction and emotional intimacy finally finding expression. When he lifted her into his arms, she didn't protest because she was tired of fighting what felt as natural as breathing. As he carried her inside, it wasn't just desire but devotion, two people who had found healing in each other finally choosing to be brave enough for love. Their lovemaking was slow, reverent, healing, every touch a promise, every kiss a vow. They explored each other with the wonder of people who thought they'd never trust their hearts again, with the desperation of souls who knew how precious and fragile love could be. When they moved together in the moonlight streaming through her bedroom windows, it wasn't just physical, it was two broken people making themselves whole, two lost souls finally finding their way home. Lying together afterward, skin against skin, heartbeats slowly returning to normal, they talked in whispered voices about the future with a certainty that surprised them both. They had moved beyond partnership, beyond attraction, beyond even love, they had found home in each other's arms. "I want to adopt them with you," he murmured against her hair. "I want to make this official, legal, permanent. I want to be their father and your husband and build the rest of our lives around that kitchen table." Her answer came through tears of joy, yes. To all of it. To forever. Chapter 9. 3 months later, they woke up in their shared bedroom. He had officially moved in, his clothes hanging beside hers in the closet they now shared, to the sounds of children arguing about pancakes versus waffles. The domestic chaos that had once terrified Sylvie now felt like the sweetest music, a symphony of belonging that played every morning. Making breakfast together, they moved around each other with practiced intimacy that spoke of mornings beyond counting. When Tobias dropped a kiss on her shoulder as she flipped pancakes, when she automatically handed him the coffee cup he was reaching for, when they tag-teamed settling an argument between Cora and Trevor about syrup distribution, they were a unit, seamless and natural and utterly right. Felicity sat at the table with her repaired bear, telling it elaborate stories about the pancakes being magic food that makes families happy forever. Trevor had syrup in his hair and paint under his fingernails from yesterday's art project, chattering about his upcoming baseball game. Cora helped serve orange juice with the serious responsibility of the eldest child, but her smile was genuine now, the protective wariness finally replaced by security. As the children played in the backyard of the house they had bought together, bigger, with space for a family and dreams of maybe expanding it someday, Tobias produced a simple, elegant ring that caught the morning sunlight like a promise. His proposal wasn't grand or dramatic, it was honest and real and perfect. "I want to make this official," he said, dropping to one knee in their kitchen where so many important moments had happened. "I want to adopt them with you. I want to build the rest of our lives around this kitchen table and these 3 amazing kids and whatever other adventures we decide to take on together." Her yes came through tears of joy, not fear. This was nothing like the life she had planned, but it was everything she never knew she needed. The ring slipped onto her finger like it had always belonged there, and when he stood to kiss her, the children's cheers from the backyard provided the perfect soundtrack to their beginning. When they told the children about their engagement and the adoption plans, Trevor asked if this meant Tobias would be their dad for real now, his gap-toothed grin splitting his face. Felicity wanted to know if they could have a family wedding where she could wear a princess dress and throw flowers. But it was Cora's reaction that broke their hearts in the most beautiful way. The little girl who had carried the weight of protecting her siblings for so long simply hugged them both and whispered, "Mom and Dad would be so happy. They always said family is about love, not just blood." In that moment, standing in their backyard with their arms around three children who had taught them how to love without reservation, Sylvie understood that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that form not from planning, but from hearts brave enough to say yes to unexpected love. Chapter 10. 6 months later, on their small family wedding day, they woke up early in their shared bed before the children stirred. The morning light streamed through windows of the home they had bought together, a real house with bedrooms for each child, a backyard where Trevor could practice baseball and Cora could read under the oak tree, and space for the family they were still becoming. In these precious quiet moments before their wedding day began in earnest, they made love with the tenderness of two people who had chosen each other completely. It was different from their first connection. Deeper, more certain, celebrating not just attraction but the family they had built and the future they were committing to together. Their bodies moved together with the familiarity of lovers who had learned each other's rhythms, each touch a renewal of vows they had been making every day for months. When Tobias whispered that he loved her, when Sylvie responded that she was ready for forever, their words carried the weight of promises kept and dreams fulfilled. Their connection represented everything they had overcome, his guilt about Maya's death transformed into devotion to their family, her fear of inadequacy replaced by confidence in their love. They had taken their broken pieces and built something beautiful together, something that honored their past pain while embracing their present joy. As they held each other afterward, they talked quietly about the future. Maybe more children, definitely more adventures, certainly more of these perfect morning moments stolen before their beautiful chaos began. The life stretching ahead of them felt infinite with possibility, grounded in the love they had fought so hard to claim. Their wedding was small, intimate, perfect, held in the backyard of their home with Mrs. Adeline officiating and the children standing as their wedding party. Cora served as maid of honor with the gravity of someone who understood the significance of the moment. Trevor and Felicity were ring bearer and flower girl, respectively, though Trevor forgot to walk slowly and Felicity threw all her petals at once in her excitement. When they exchanged vows, they spoke not just to each other but to the children who had brought them together, promising to love and protect and choose each other every day for the rest of their lives. Their first kiss as a married couple was witnessed by three children who cheered like they had just scored the winning goal, and in many ways, they had. And so Sylvie learned that sometimes the family you never planned becomes the love you never knew you needed. She discovered that strength isn't about having walls that keep people out, it's about having the courage to let the right people in. Tobias found that healing doesn't mean forgetting those we've lost, it means honoring them by choosing to love again. Their story reminds us that we don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love. We don't have to have all the answers to provide exactly what someone needs. Sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that form not from plans, but from hearts brave enough to say yes to unexpected love. 6 months after their wedding, when Sylvie held their adoption certificates, all three children now legally hers and Tobias's, she understood that this had always been their destiny. The children who had lost their parents had found new ones. The woman who had built walls around her heart had learned to love without reservation. The man who thought he could never trust his heart again had discovered that some risks are worth everything. In their kitchen, around the table where so many important conversations had happened, they were exactly what they had always been meant to be, a family that chose each other, fought for each other, and loved each other through everything life could offer. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever discovered that the thing you thought you didn't want was actually everything you needed? Have you found family in unexpected places? Share your stories of unexpected blessings in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and let me know which moment resonated most with you. And if you haven't already joined our Dear Love Diaries family, that subscribe button is waiting for you. We have so many more stories of hearts finding their home. Tomorrow, we'll explore another tale of love conquering fear, of two souls finding exactly what they need in the last place they thought to look. Until then, remember that your capacity for love is far greater than your fear of being hurt, and sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives are the ones we never saw coming. Sweet dreams, beautiful family. See you tomorrow for another story from our Diary of Love.